Hello, folks. Welcome back. And here we are with another interview experience video. And today we are going to again pick brains of Piyush because why not? He's here with us. Uh, so yeah, let's sort of get to know how his journey was like. I think we have covered two of his journeys in part one and two. We'll have the links down if you want to revisit that. And overall I think he has applied and gotten offers in most of them from different companies, Qualcomm, Nvidia, Google. And I think he sort of went through ARM and Intel in first two videos, and I think we can maybe continue from there. What do you say, Piyush?
Yeah,
For
I
the
think
next
I
ones.
think
Okay.
yeah, that's a good idea. And
Hmm.
also, this is like chronologically valid
Hmm.
also,
Hmm. Hmm.
so makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Take over, please.
All right. Cool. So now we are talking about me interviewing at Qualcomm, and
Hmm.
this was, I suppose, again, I don't recall exact timeline of events, but I got an internship at Intel. Worked as an intern for a year, 2015, 2016.
Hmm.
2016, I get a full-time offer from Intel in with their Bluetooth team. So I'm employed there. And about 8 months down the line, I happened to interview at ARM. I got an offer from ARM, but I was too comfortable at Intel. So I decided to stay back. Right. And well, the people at Intel were like just amazing. Right. Very supportive. I like they mentored me a lot. I could screw up, and they were like polite enough to correct me. So I decided to stay back at Intel. But then 6 months later, this must have been like
19.
2018ish, I think
18.
2018 Jan Feb timeframe.
Hmm.
So a recruiter from Qualcomm Bangalore, she pings me on LinkedIn, obviously,
Hmm.
and I suppose she had sent out that email to like everyone based on a filter,
Hmm.
right? And it was more like, hey, Qualcomm is hiring
Hmm.
XYZ, and your profile has like this CPUs mentioned in it. Would you be interested?
Hmm.
And I just wanted to kind of try out uh, and validate myself as
Hmm.
as an engineer and as an embedded engineer,
Hmm.
um, which I do not recommend people, by the way. Do not
Oh,
go into an
okay.
interview wanting to validate your abilities, because let's say if the interview doesn't go great, for whatever reason, you might be good at X, they might be looking for Y, the match doesn't happen, but you went in to validate your abilities there, and obviously, fell on your face there.
Hmm.
So it really hurts the self esteem and might even push you into the corner of thinking that, maybe you're not good enough. Right. So I recommend not to do that. In my case, I went in wanting to validate my abilities, but or kind of just test myself, and it worked. So my confidence went up.
Hmm.
But the opposite can also happen, and that's very dangerous.
But I've heard, Piyush, it's a very interesting point that you have raised. So I've heard a lot of times from a lot of folks that keep interviewing. It's always good to
Oh, that is correct.
place yourself. So how do
That
you
is correct.
detach your self confidence with your performance from interview?
Well, I think your self confidence always gets a hit if things
Hmm.
don't go good.
Hmm.
But then the upshot is, if you try this process algorithmically, saying, I am aware that I know these bits of technology. Let's say I know C language, I
Hmm.
know some bits of, ARM M processor, whatever. You walk in with that,
Hmm.
and everything that was outside of these topics, you take a note,
Hmm.
mental
Hmm.
notes,
Hmm.
in terms of, oh, this can also be asked, and oh, this was also important. Okay, for the next time I must
Hmm.
cover some ground on this,
Hmm.
right? And sometimes what happens is, you being familiar with those topics also earns you brownie
Hmm.
points. Like you might not be able to, let's say, solve a very specific bit manipulation question down to like, the right answer, but the fact that you're doing the shifts correctly somewhere, you're talking about those operations, that can give enough data to the recruiter, or not the recruiter, the interviewer, to have the confidence that, on a team, you won't be confused, you will work in the right direction, and
mm,
you will solve the problem. You're not able to do it in like 30 minutes, but if you take 1.5 hours,
mm,
you'll be fine.
mm,
Right? So okay, going back to the ping, the recruiter, kind of, I got an email from that
mm,
recruiter. Then I replied back saying, okay, I'm interested. And one of the things that, again, fed into my confidence in terms of going and applying elsewhere was the fact that I already had a job. The
right,
fact
right.
that there is food on table, that somewhere
Mm,
nudged me that it's okay to try out. Worst
mm,
case,
Mm.
I fail, and that's that.
mm,
Right? I learned
And
something from
I
it.
think is one interesting point here that we all got a ping from recruiter rather than we went ahead and applied. So
Yeah, yeah.
that is a very common, I
Well,
think.
the only time I was applying was when was an intern. I
Yeah.
needed
mm,
a job. Right?
So I
After
think
that,
like
hmm,
for some reason, like every time, so I have encountered a bunch of other people, and they also got the recruiter from the ping from the recruiter.
yeah.
So I think if you are visible enough and your the LinkedIn profile is updated, then you get you get to get the messages from recruiters.
That is true.
Yeah.
That is so true. And I was active on LinkedIn for God
mm,
knows why back then, but I was, right.
Hmm.
And
mm,
I would always go back and update like the right
mm. Keywords.
skills. Yeah,
Yeah.
write like a nice description.
Mm,
Somewhere maybe the fact that I was already working at Intel, played a role in that,
mm,
because there are handful of semiconductor
right.
companies, at least in Bangalore, and they kind of headhunt from each other, right?
Mm,
The recruiters.
right.
Okay, anywho, so she pinged me. I replied back. Then she got on a call with me. We talked about what the role is. Sorry about that. That's
Mm,
okay. My sister tried calling me,
mm,
and that might actually happen again. Okay, so got on a call with her. She explained that it's there's like, again, some multimedia wing of
mm,
Qualcomm that needs embedded engineers. The role is within this, that. She explained a little bit firmware development,
mm.
bring ups, this, that.
And this happened. This was for Qualcomm Bangalore or Hyderabad?
Yes, this was Qualcomm Bangalore. By the way, I have an interesting story from Qualcomm Hyderabad also,
Okay.
where I got rejected, and didn't
This
have
was
like.
post this or prior to this?
This was post this. Yes,
Post.
post
Okay.
this.
But I
Like
will save it for a later time. I think.
yes, yes. So this was around when I interviewed at Nvidia, which
Hmm.
is like much later. We'll talk about that later.
Sure.
But so the first experience at interviewing at Qualcomm
Hmm.
was in the Bangalore
In
office,
Bangalore. Hmm.
and so here's the interesting thing. It was a walk-in style of interviews,
Hmm.
so they kind of called me up on a Saturday. Right? They were
Oh.
like, hey, we have this hiring drive going on.
Hmm.
We understand that people cannot take
Hmm. Hmm.
leaves on Friday, so on and so
Right.
forth. So they called up called us up on like Saturday.
Hmm.
So Saturday I drive over to their office, thinking I might, like, I didn't know it was like a walk-in thingy.
Hmm.
I discovered it once I landed there. Like
Hmm.
once I went into their campus, it was like, oh, okay, there are like 60 other people here. Nice.
Okay.
So there were people from all over the place, all over, like many
Hmm.
different companies. But the fact that it was like an walk-in drive,
Hmm.
uh, I kind of took a mental note that I should just play, or just play this thing out, right?
Right.
Go get interviewed, see how things go.
Hmm.
So somewhere that took the pressure off me.
Hmm.
I was like, if it happens, it happens. If it
Hmm.
doesn't, it doesn't.
Hmm.
Hmm.
So I there were four technical rounds. So different engineers interviewed me, and also the manager interviewed me. And what different engineers were interested in. So one of the engineers kind of tried and probed about some digital logic.
Hmm.
He asked me to like draw some digital, gave me like a digital circuit to draw the diagram of. And I mean, it was very straightforward, some very straightforward, like
Hmm.
compared to numbers, how would you
Hmm.
do it in hardware, that kind of a thing. And just had to draw like some block diagram, reason
Hmm.
about that.
Hmm.
Register here, register there, two
Right.
numbers, look cycle, blah blah blah, whatever. Okay, so that happened. And in all of the interviews, I'm just like speaking
Right. Right.
heads, kind of a heads up, giving heads up, which is, while at Intel, I was trying to sharpen my skills and I was trying to work on the ARM MCPUs in my personal time,
Hmm.
right? So what I was trying to achieve and was to blink two LEDs in parallel, but as part of two separate while loops,
It
right?
just
And you have to
Hmm.
do
So you
this at
have
a bare
okay.
minimum.
The problem
Yeah.
statement was you just wanted to do something, which was like very simply
Yep.
blinking an LED, but
In parallel.
in parallel, in sort of a pseudo parallel manner
Pseudo
on
parallel.
a M class. Nice. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Got
So the idea being that, can I implement like a
it.
context switch?
Hmm.
Can
Hmm.
Hmm.
I write like a scheduler for two
Sort of a
while
mini schedule.
one loops? Yeah. So each LED blink was like a while one,
Hmm.
but that would, the CPU was supposed to cycle between both
Hmm.
of
Hmm.
them,
Hmm.
back and forth, right? So I had, here and there YouTube tutorials, some
Hmm.
documentation, some university lecture,
Hmm.
whatever, managed to do that.
Nice.
And I had that on my GitHub, and
Hmm.
I also put that on my resume,
Hmm.
which also kind of fed into my credibility there.
Hmm.
And that one thing has worked charms for me. Someone at the door, I suppose. Okay.
Yeah, let me.
Attend to that. Okay, fair.
Hmm.
All right. So, and I suppose I also talked about this in my interview at ARM, the previous video. So, anywho, this
Nice.
piece of work
Hmm.
was still on my resume, very
Hmm.
valid. So, as the ARM engineers were trying to probe me, I would try and see if there is like any keyword that can let me talk about my own project. So, for
Oh.
example, if they would, let's say somebody nudged around, okay, how does the CPU boot up, for example, or if which happened, by the way, right? Then, like one of the
Hmm.
interviewers wanted to know, from power on to the first line of code, what happens.
What happened?
And of course, I didn't know all the details, but what I could tell there in that interview, right? And by the way, this is the second interview, second or third interview
Hmm.
now.
Hmm.
So what I could tell in that interview was, hey, you know what? I have actually tried out booting a CPU from scratch. Now, what I understand is the CPU is held in reset, and there is like a power circuit. So when we press a button, the power circuit acts,
Hmm.
kicks in, and at some point, the CPU, like CPU clocks are enabled, and the CPU is allowed to move forward. And I can tell you the
Hmm.
story what happens after that. Would you be interested? And they're like, yeah, yeah, okay, fine. I forgive you, or
Hmm.
it's not important
Hmm.
that you know all the. Tell me anything and everything that you know about how the now what was happening at that point, what I registered again, this is like that algorithmic process.
Hmm.
I had walked in with, okay, I know these XYZ things, maybe I get this offer, maybe I don't, let's see where it goes. This guy happened to ask me all of this, and then I just went loose. I just explained to him that, okay, this is like the vector table,
Hmm.
there is a stack pointer here, the first line of the reset
Right.
handler is at this point, and it jumps here. And then he also got curious, and then he would ask me, okay, how does the context switch happen,
Hmm.
what
Hmm.
happens when the interrupt happens, and I was
Hmm.
able to explain all of that. And the more he probed me on that, the more I could plug in and talk about my project.
Yeah.
Like,
So
how
the
does
more
it?
you shone brighter over, on that side, I think.
Yeah.
So the
So, go ahead.
so I was just like taking a note here, just for myself and for our viewers, that what you did was, if you felt like the question was a bit near to what you had worked on previously, or as a side project, you sort of nudged them towards your field of expertise, basically, or
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 Hmm.
the
rather, it's
rather
something that I have worked on. Maybe I'm
worked
not
on.
an expert, but
Hmm.
I know
Yeah.
something about this. Can you probe me on this and figure if
Hmm.
I can be a fit on your team?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
that usually flies. So I
Hmm.
tend to do three things, and in all the interviews, I know this works like a charm, or works for a
Hmm.
fact. So the first thing is you admit to what you don't know. Right? For example, the
Hmm.
power on circuit related details. I was like, look, I do not know, the boot up, like how the CPU itself is powered on. So first, I admit as to what I don't know.
Hmm.
The second is I kind of still throw in what I know about power related things. For example,
Hmm.
clock needs to be enabled, the
Hmm.
voltage needs to go up at some point.
Right.
Then I try and predict and I call that out. I say, okay, I do
Hmm.
not know for a fact how this circuit exactly precisely works, but based on what I know about the CPU needing or the circuit needing clock and voltage, I anticipate that there must be some stage where the voltage is turned on, and then only after the
Hmm.
voltage is turned on, the circuit should get like a clock, for
Hmm.
example.
Hmm.
Right? So the moment someone does that, and even when I'm taking interviews, when someone does that, what they are demonstrating is there is like an island that I know nothing about, but then I know something on the periphery of that, and those might become the keywords, or those might become the vocabulary or anchor points that I pivot on and find more information about this island. Right.
mm,
So unknown, some known,
So you
and
demonstrate
combination.
that ability,
Yeah.
basically.
And I think
mm,
that's well, I'm not like boasting at this point. I'm nowhere
Hmm.
as good in terms of doing this. But if any college grad or any engineer that I'm trying to interview, and if they give away some hint of being able to navigate ambiguity, or just the
Hmm.
willingness to
Hmm.
kind of float or swim into ambiguity, that's a very big green flag for me. Right? It's like
Hmm.
mm,
this person at least is able to tolerate and not frightened by this unknown.
Hmm.
They're able to also admit that they don't
mm,
know.
Hmm.
And when I admit that I don't know, it doesn't mean don't ask me any more questions on this.
Right.
It's like, okay, let's see how far I can go.
Yeah.
You're
mm,
free to ask more questions, but I'll just kind of approximately ask.
Is this the way
mm,
of your admission? Calling
Mm,
upfront, hey, I don't know,
mm,
but I'm willing to try and take
mm,
guesses
mm.
and sort of
Yes.
improve myself based on
Mm.
new info
Yeah,
given
and
to me.
I know Dave, you have a question. We'll come to that. So what I do is I don't blurt out saying, "Hey, these are the unknown topics to me." Once they ask a question, then I break it apart, saying, "Okay, these are the pieces I know something about. This is completely blank.
Hmm.
This I think I have an idea about. And now, given this background information about the unknown, I predict that this shall be happening."
Hmm.
Right? And it's okay. Go ahead and ask me more question. Let's
mm,
test how far I can go. And the moment you do that, the moment you say that, if it's a team where innovative thinking is required, or challenges are new every day, they'll really really appreciate something like some person like that on the team.
Hmm. Hmm.
mm.
Go ahead, Dave. I think you
So
have a
I
question.
think I also wanted to, share my thought.
Mhm.
Since in the most of the interviews, like I have seen in other companies where, in out of let's say 4 or 5 interviews, 2 out of 5 interviews you will have 2 interviews around your projects or your past experience, right? And then if you have done that work honestly, right, like if you have worked on the project from scratch, you know anything and everything about your project, all the technology, all the stack, everything, then that becomes a great point of discussion in the interview, right?
Yeah,
And then if you've done that honestly, then of course, like share more and more info, and then more and more questions. So I think whole interview goes into that direction.
yeah,
And and that is a very positive thing, because you are comfortable at that point that you are sharing what you already know, and then you build on that, right? And then the interview is receiving the information that you have done this kind of work in the past honestly, right?
yeah,
It's not like, okay, you have taken some projects from the github and then modified some bits and then released, right? So that gives you that info that, okay, this guy is a person who built things from scratch, or at least learn everything what he's working on, right? So that is I think a positive thing.
yeah, true. And I actually kind of want to extend that a little bit. Even
Mm,
if somebody has, let's say, copied a project from GitHub, borrowed pieces
correct.
from GitHub, I suppose that is still fine in terms of,
Mm,
like, of course, licensing terms and all of that, they should
Hmm.
be able to take care of that. But even if somebody has taken code from the open source and modified it and really spent time, doing that in detail. And the fact that in interviews they're kind of admitting or letting the interviewer know that, hey, I didn't write this completely from scratch. I
Hmm.
took pieces, but then on the pieces, this is how I combined them and got this application to work. That's
Right.
also a very good sign. And the second thing is, which you touched upon, but I'll just reiterate, which is the way to differentiate between someone who is like faking their experience on like college project or project at work also, and someone who has honestly worked on it, is the one who has honestly worked on it will be able to answer layered questions. Right, you
Hmm.
start from the top layer and ask them questions that are like, okay,
Hmm.
how did you handle that, how did you handle that, 2 to 3 levels of like a depth they'll be able to answer.
Hmm.
So
Right.
that's like at least how I
Yeah.
probe
And
with
and
not.
and one funny point here is that most of the times, if you are faking, the interviewer will know.
That is
They
true.
will definitely know it,
That
and
is true.
then that is a very, a negative or red flag, right?
Yeah.
So I think there are times when people try to, you know,
Okay.
fake things, or they try to, go very briefly over it, and then at that time,
Spill the
interviewer know,
beans.
okay, this guy is either faking or, you know,
Is
uh,
dishonest.
yeah, being, dishonest. Yeah,
And actually, being dishonest hurts you a lot more
right.
than not answering the question because you honestly don't know about it. Right?
Hmm.
Because then all of a sudden it is unclear whether or not you can be trusted as a team member.
Right.
Right. And it even if someone's like a genius but cannot be trusted on a team, I think the team is
Yeah.
well off not having them on the team. Yeah. Okay, cool. So back to the interview where I was asked about like the boot process.
Hmm.
So I ended up suggesting that I know from the like CPU boot upwards, and okay, the two while loops is what I have implemented. And then
Hmm.
the interviewer was like delighted,
Hmm.
asked me more questions as to, okay, how do you ensure the context switch is happening? I was like, okay, system timer interrupt,
Yeah.
I program that, and every once in a while
Hmm.
or every fixed duration the sysdig
Hmm.
happens. It's like, okay, how does the interrupt
Hmm.
mess with the pre-existing execution? I was like,
Hmm.
okay, this is what I know about it. Again, I won't be able to answer layered questions because
Hmm.
my knowledge is also fragile on this. But what I understand is when an interrupt happens, these registers are saved on this stack, that register is saved on that stack, whatever, right? And when I'm trying to pop that, like load another process or another while loop, here's how I do so.
Hmm.
And at least at the end of that interview, the interviewer walked out happy, I walked out happy. And the reason I walked out happy was I made a friend, right? Yeah, he was like, hey, you already have a job at Intel. Why are you considering Qualcomm,
Hmm.
given that the positions are similar? And my answer was, honestly, I just came over to talk to the engineers. and,
Yeah.
seeing like the 60 other people downstairs, like in the lobby, I was like, I understand that the chances here are like
Very
slim
sad.
because other people looked pro. It like the way
Hmm.
they had come. Like, I went in like a t-shirt and a jeans,
Eyes.
right? Very cool, casual. If it flies, it flies. If not,
Hmm.
fine. And then there were people in formals, with documents,
Folders.
not yeah,
Nice
folders, documents,
polished shoes.
yeah. And me being like a fresh college grad, so to speak, 1.5 years of experience, I was like, okay, maybe they know a lot about how things go than I do. All right, so I just told that engineer that I'm just here, to talk and
Yeah.
see, how well I do. Fair. So this was the second interview. The first one was around like digital
The
logic
digital
and
one.
yeah, some
Hmm.
questions around whether or not I understood what is a clock, how logic moves,
Hmm.
1 0, CMOS, this that.
Hmm.
Again, it was not like too detailed. It was just that in the conversation all of these keywords came up, and I suppose this team was some had something to do around power optimizations or power of the multimedia something, right? Someone also asked me, I think it was in the first interview itself, that interviewer asked me about HDMI protocol. right?
Hmm.
And how HDMI protocol works. And I was like I got no idea of what HDMI is. I just know HDMI cable. But then again, I said that okay, let me try an answer. So here's the screen, and here's how a pixel is. A pixel is like a 3 RGB value, and so this HDMI whatever protocol needs to do that, and it needs to kind of three entries per pixel. Then given the resolution number of
Hmm.
pixels, it
Hmm.
would need to dump those many pixel values or the data related to the color values. Given the refresh rate, this is how fast it would need to do. And
Hmm.
I understand whatever this HDMI protocol underlying thingy
Hmm.
is, VP or like whatever.
Hmm.
I don't recall anything. I still don't know how HDMI works. I just know somewhere there is relation to I to C somewhere. Maybe it
Hmm.
just has to do with sending control commands, whatever.
Hmm.
Um, but anywho, the fact that I was able to reason through or make up my own knowledge base as to what HDMI should fall in the periphery of, I think that also earned me brownie
Hmm.
points, right? So the first interview is done. The second one was around like the accidentally around boot process and power on and CPUs, all of that. The third one did not go well. I thought. Right?
Okay.
So I go into that interview, and this is like again another engineer that I became friends with, and he later on I suppose went on to work in Cambridge, because we were like connected on LinkedIn. And okay, so he now starts to ask me questions around C,
Hmm.
and he's probing me on the storage classes, which variable lives where, what is the scope of. So he's like probing me left and right on how much of the C language I know. And around the storage classes, around like the volatile keyword, I was screwing up. Right?
Hmm.
I was visibly screwing up. I was saying that this is what can happen, and he's like, nope, wrong. So the confidence was also tanking. So I assumed that okay, maybe this one is not going to go great. So I just let him know, okay, my understanding here is shaky, and I admit to that, and that was fine. So we had like I suppose it was a short interview, 20-30 minutes
Hmm.
ish. The others were like 45 ish, or maybe time passed different
Hmm. Hmm.
for
Hmm.
me. Different conversations. No. So once he was done probing me, I was not able to read whether or not you know
Hmm.
things looked good.
Yeah.
So I just honestly asked him, saying, "Hey, do you have any feedback in terms of what I can do well or what I should revisit?" And then he was like, "Yeah, you should revisit concepts around how variables are stored in memory, how uh, placement of the code happens, and this and that." And I was like, "Okay, fine." I and then when I walked out, I was like, "I'm done. This
Hmm.
like this position is gone because there are other people with folder, and they know well.
They know.
Yeah.
Maybe they'll be able to answer all of this." And I had not explored or worked with C language in that sense, where I would need to reason about,
Hmm.
okay, is a volatile keyword required here? Like the drivers I was working on, the code for that was already written. I was just kind of manipulating here
Hmm.
and there, extending, adding features, and the code written was like pretty solid already, so I
Hmm.
didn't have to do
Right.
much. Anywho, and also the parts that I touched, I did not bother to think as much.
Hmm.
And well, I'm talking in context with the parallel project that I was doing, right? The
I see.
scheduler,
Yeah.
right? So if there was, let's say, somewhere a volatile used, I did not bother to in absolute terms reason about
Hmm.
it or find out why it was used. I understood that it has to do with the fact that the value can change, you know
Hmm.
externally also, typically GPIO port. That was the thing. I was
Hmm.
The question or the depth he wanted to go out to was, okay, I understand the GPIO port, but let's say we don't have that. Then when do you use a volatile? And then I was like, okay, I don't know how out of
Hmm.
context things can change. And for our viewers, the volatile keyword has to do with the fact that the variable value well, first of it won't be optimized out, but that's like again a pseudo not so clean reason. A
Hmm.
very good reason is that the variable value is not cached in the CPU registers. The code is generated in a way that it ensures that the value is acted upon and then pushed back to its source, and this source can be the next level of cache also, right? But the key is the value is not retained after modification in the CPU registers. It's not cached locally within the CPU. That's the clean answer for a volatile related question. Anyway, so he was seeking that level of insight and I didn't have it. So he then suggested that, okay, go ahead, revise this and that, and spend more time doing this. And I walked out thinking it's done. Right. So then they scheduled a fourth round, same day. Right.
Hmm.
So this round was with the manager. So the
Hmm.
manager now, I think by this time he had some feedback on me. And again, the
So
60 people.
was it supposed to? So when this round was scheduled, did you know that you have
So I
cleared
had,
basically?
after the third interview, I had gone for lunch,
Hmm.
expecting that after lunch they'll let me know
Announce.
that,
Hmm.
okay, bye bye.
Hmm.
That didn't happen, right? So what? Okay, I should also mention. So 60 of us were seated in a room, and one by one, people were getting caught. And
Hmm.
every time I would return back, the crowd would be like 60 down to 40 down to
Hmm.
20. And after my third interview, like there were 20 of us and we went for lunch.
Hmm.
When I returned back, there were only five of us.
Hmm.
And that somewhere was, again, it restored my faith in
Hmm.
myself. Either the third interview's feedback hadn't reached yet, or somewhere,
Bits
that
were
person,
manipulated in between.
yes,
Yeah.
or that person borderline was all right with me.
Hmm.
Right?
Mm,
And turned out he was really
All
all
right.
right with me.
Yeah.
Yeah, he,
mm,
he was just being very honest and
Hmm.
transparent, like a true engineer. But he somewhere gave me enough points to not be in his "I don't like this candidate" camp.
Hmm.
Right?
Got it.
So the fourth round is with the manager now, and so the manager comes in like with a pen and paper. We are seated next to each other. No whiteboard in this one.
Hmm.
The other one kind of had whiteboard, but no whiteboard here. He draws a diagram of two
Hmm.
CPUs, one memory, like common memory,
Hmm.
and he's like, "Look, there are two CPUs. They want to talk to the memory and also share data between each other.
Hmm.
mm,
What are the different ways in this can be achieved?"
Hmm.
Man, I really threw everything that I knew about CPUs, shared memory, interrupt one CPU,
Hmm.
interrupting other one, passing some message,
Hmm.
this, that. And every time he would kind of, pause me and add like a question that layers the answer.
Hmm.
For example, it's like, okay, I'll have a common memory and both of them will go. It's like, okay, now one of them is polling, the other one is changing it. Will it work? It's like, yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, okay. One read, one write, fine. Now both
mm,
are trying to write them. What happens? And it's like, okay, producer consumer, somewhere a mutex is required. Then he's like, what is a mutex? I'm like, okay, whatever I know about mutex, I put that on the
Hmm.
table. He was very friendly,
Hmm.
but he did grill me in a
Hmm.
positive way. Like he
Hmm.
would just, again, he would just see how much deeper can I go.
Hmm.
And at any point, if I said this is the limit of my knowledge, he would like wind up and go to the next question. So this one was also pretty confusing, right, in terms of the
Right.
questions asked. But the fact that he was very polite and very, you know, it felt engineer to engineer talk, a senior and a junior talk, that kind of a
Hmm.
thing. So that went all right. And I, came out from there.
Hmm.
And then the HR or the recruiter asked me to kind of, wait.
Okay.
And this again, this wait part is like a theme also that happens in future interviews. They ask
Hmm.
me to wait, I wait, and then they are like, okay,
Hmm.
we are, wanting to hire you.
Hmm.
So 15 minutes later, the recruiter shows up and she's like, hey, all the
Hmm.
interviews viewers liked you, the interviews were great, we would want to, consider hiring you.
Hmm.
And then she went on to talking about things I was not sure if I was super comfortable with. She asked me, okay, can you share your current
Hmm.
details of compensation? And I was like, man, all of what happened was one thing that I was experimenting with, but the other thing I need to learn experimenting and was
Right.
negotiating.
Right.
So at this point, the question was, do I stay honest with her
Hmm.
or do I manipulate, right? And thank God that I chose to just be honest with her. And I told her that, okay, X is the number I'm at. This is like the equity that I'm having. Didn't have much, but whatever the number was, I let her know. And this is like the sign on bonus that Intel had
Hmm.
offered me. Right. And straight up front, she is like, oh, but this is too less. And I
Hmm.
was like, good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead. So,
Then your numbers would be high. So
oh yeah, so she gave me like like roughly 50-55% hike.
Hmm.
Again, college grad, and they were hiring
Right.
for 3 years experience, but I was fitting the bill, whatever.
Hmm. Hmm.
And the number was bonkers,
Hmm.
right? It was like 55% more than what I was, 55-60% more than what I was earning, or actually more than that, 70-80%,
Hmm.
somewhere bonkers. Almost seemed like double my salary kind of thing.
Hmm.
And again, it's very easy to do that for a fresh grad, not so much
hmm.
for
Hmm.
experience. There's a story there also. But then she threw that in. So I got
Hmm.
to know that, okay, for like a 2 year experience, you like the industry is paying this much. And she's like, yeah, around this
That's.
ballpark is standard. Like, I have to give you this much because the position has this much expense against it. Right? I cannot bring you at your own salary, even if, or
Hmm.
30% raise, even if you want.
Hmm.
So that was good. They threw in a lot of
Hmm.
stocks which were like 10x of
Hmm.
what I had at
Hmm.
Intel. And again, I didn't have as much at Intel. So 10x might seem like a big number, but looking back, it feels as though it's completely true. And then she threw in like a sign-on bonus
Hmm.
also, two and a half, something like, right? So my compensation was like,
70 times that.
yeah, it was like glowing. I was amazed by that. And she just told me like the rough numbers. She was not like, this is the exact number.
Hmm.
She's like, it will be roughly here.
Hmm. Hmm.
This much would be the stock component. This is how much you can
Hmm.
expect. So I'm happy. Saturday has gone well for me.
Well.
I'm driving back home. It's around 4 o'clock. And the engineer who had asked me, like a senior engineer who had asked me about the boot up process, is also heading back home. So
The
both of
second round.
second round,
us,
yeah.
yeah. So both of us meet in the lift again, the
Hmm.
elevator. And then he was like, so you're done for the day? I was like, yes, I'm done. Thank you for, having a chat with me, and thank you for your positive feedback. He was like, yeah, you're good. You're good. And he gave away that part as to what worked, right? And it was like, hey, you kind of
Hmm.
were not deterred by the ambiguity. You tried to float in that, you admitted, and this was
Hmm.
like a 10-second ish talk, like from
Mhm.
Hmm.
third floor down to third or second floor down to the
Yeah.
ground. Right? And then he bid adieu, and I said bye bye. And I
Hmm.
made a friend there. I forget
Hmm.
his name now because I couldn't go, like, back then I didn't go back and connect to
Yeah.
him on LinkedIn. Felt it would be creepy
Hmm.
to go
Yes.
back and do it, so I did.
Hmm.
And now I forgot his name. But okay, so that happened, and I was driving back home happily. And in between, I started to think, so why are they paying me so much?
Hmm.
Right. And at least back then, Qualcomm had, like, at least within my peers or my friend circle, it was like, okay, they like, the work is too much at Qualcomm.
Hmm.
I was like, man, but I'm happy at Intel. So things are good. So
Hmm.
somewhere then I went in the direction of, okay, let me try to negotiate my offer and
Hmm.
see if this can be cranked up. Right. And at this point, I had information about things having,
Hmm.
gone well, people liking me, and then it was like, okay, now can I push this? Right. By the way, for the same reasons, I was banned at ARM uh, the previous year because I tried to negotiate my what was it, my sign-on bonus,
Hmm.
and used that as the ground to not join. And the reasoning was so terrible.
Hmm.
A complete rookie at the game of negotiation. The reason I used was, okay, if you make the sign
Tax or
on,
something?
yes, tax
Okay.
protected. I mean, and
Okay, so what is that? What is tax
so,
protected?
the thing is, let's say if your for simple calculation, if your sign on bonus is, let's say, 1 lakh,
Hmm.
so you will get 1 lakh minus the tax.
Hmm.
Fair.
Hmm.
Tax protection means they will pay you extra, which will be deducted, and you will get 1 lakh in hand.
Hmm.
Ah, okay.
So
Right?
Piyush
You
essentially
wanted
demanded
20,
33% more.
30% extra.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's it. But
That's it.
the
But the thing was,
word, yeah, or
yeah,
something,
the words are weird, which is tax protection, and she's like,
we
in
don't
the
do that.
system, yeah, we don't do it here. And I was like, but the other companies do it, and I had like no idea whether other companies do it or not.
Actually, it is true to some sense. The
Well, Intel, I
relocation
think,
bonuses
did.
and all, they probably Intel did. Yeah, yeah,
I,
yeah.
I I recall because that's where I borrowed my terminology from.
Mhm.
And then she was like, but, and this is the arm recruiter, right? And she was like, hey, but we cannot do that. We don't do it here. And I was like, no, but you have to. If you want me,
And
you have to. And she was like, no, we cannot do that. Then I was like, oh, if you can't do that, then I'm out. Like, bye.
Mhm.
The problem was I had stretched this conversation for like a week. So she got so pissed off that she, okay, like I did get my offer letter, which I happily rejected. But like next year or a year and a half, when I was again trying to apply different places, Qualcomm being accidentally one of them, I got a rejection letter from her. And I was like, oh,
Hmm.
I see what happened here.
No,
Right?
but you still interesting thing is you still future you would then again go on to apply
Yeah,
to ARM, get offer
yeah.
from
By
Cambridge
the way,
and
I also later got an offer from Arm Cambridge,
Cambridge. Yeah,
which is for some other day.
yeah.
I've had too many offers. I know this game pretty well now.
Hmm.
Anywho, so I'm driving back home. I start to think around, okay, why are they offering me this much? Sure, I'm really sure that the work is too much, and I don't mind the work is too much part. What I mind is, or what back then I was more concerned about is, I did not know as much embedded. And what if you throw me into like too much ambiguity? And of course the interviewers were nice, but what if they are not my seniors?
hmm.
Then whom do I go and talk to? And what if that person
Hmm.
turns out to be like not so good of a mentor? And then what happens? Do I struggle for 6 months, 9 months, and then look for a change again?
Hmm.
So which I suppose everybody starts to think on once you have got an offer from another company. But then I went down that lane, started to reason about it, and I was like, okay, I'll wait for the offer. Right. And the offer arrived like next day morning.
Hmm.
I was at work, and the offer arrives, and the offer like blows my mind. It's exactly in the
What
positive
the
ballpark of, okay,
exactly?
if I were to spill out the numbers back then, it was like around, and people can work backwards as to what my salary at Intel must have been, blah blah, whatever.
Hmm.
So the Qualcomm numbers were 18 and a half in terms of salary, annual salary, take home. Yeah, annual base pay.
Base.
Yeah, 18 point something, and 13-ish K of stocks, and 2.5 lakhs of bonus. Right. And this for me back then was like glowing numbers. It's like, oh
Hmm.
God, I'm rich, that kind of thing. Right. By the way, when I had joined Intel, I was like, this money is enough to retire. I was like, my expenses are so low, I don't need anything else in life. And then, yeah, but then the 18 was very sweet. It
Hmm.
was nice. The
Yeah.
stocks was nice, and the 2.5 was nice. So, contemplated on that offer. I was like, okay, I'll get back to you. My manager, my director is out. I need to talk to him, blah, blah, blah. And they were honestly out of town.
Hmm.
Right. So I had to wait to talk to them. But like my director was back sooner, and he is such an amazing person, man. So I just went ahead and had talk with him again. So I let him know of the arm offer. And this
So
time
what would be the time delta between those two talks?
6 to 7 months.
6. Like
Right.
not this
Has
again, man.
every 6 months you come back
Yeah.
with another offer.
Well, I know someone else
Mhm.
who would come back with an offer every year. But of course, you have to be like a super productive and useful engineer to be able to do all of these. And you have to do it in the right spirit. You should not blackmail. right?
Mm.
Sometimes what happens is you having an offer becomes a tool for your
Mm.
manager to get you legally
Right.
like a better hike, right?
Mm.
Not that you should go and do
Mm.
this like periodically. People spot pattern and he's like, take this guy out, please. We cannot afford him anymore. Anyways, so I went ahead and talked to my director. I told him, arm had come way back in the, which I told him then also, that I let go of the arm offer just because I like to liked work at Intel.
Mm.
And this time around, I told him the same story. I
Mm.
told him, look, I just randomly walked in. I was unaware. All of this happened. I thought I will be thrown out. And that didn't happen. They ended up liking me, and this is the offer that they have given to me. What would you recommend? And see, what would you recommend, as seen from the
Mm.
external perspective now, will sound like, are you crazy? But my director was so nice and honest.
Mm.
He really cared about
Mm.
people's growth. So he sat down with me, spent an hour evaluating as to how we can get me at the numbers there at Intel. And at least back then, he said that it would take at least year and a half, and even then I would fall short of some number. And I was like, okay. And then, well, again, the numbers were not as much great. But then he also suggested, is there anything else that you would want to try out at Intel, right, within the team? And then slowly he left at that. Next day or 2 days later, we met again. I wanted to tell him that the recruiters are asking me, my manager is back. I didn't talk to my manager at all. That didn't happen. So my manager never got to know that I had an offer,
Mm.
or maybe he got to know through the director. That must have happened. So 2 days later, I talked to him again. He tells me, hey, look, there is the RF team that we are wanting to form at Intel, Bluetooth RF. Would that interest you? And I was like, man, sure, why not? And then he's like, okay, this is the person in Oregon that you should talk to. And he was like a very senior person. So I saw an opportunity of doing RF, like
Mm.
a black magic thing that maybe only handful of engineers get to work on. I decided that I wanted to do
Pursue
that.
that.
Right.
Mm.
And I pursued it for like a year and a half, and then the
Mm.
team was axed for various reasons.
Mm.
Um, Intel went through like a tough time then, and the team had to kind of be dissolved,
Mm.
and engineers went elsewhere in the same team
Mm.
or other sister teams, so to speak. But so I had a talk with him, figured that the bare basics of electromagnetics was what was required.
Mm.
That it's an oscillating electric field and a perpendicular B field, and that's all right. If you know that, you're good. Because there were only going to be two people on that team, me and my manager,
Mm.
right? My manager, he came from like the VLSI background. He wanted to try out analog. Right. So he wanted to try out the analog and RF part of things.
Mm.
I wanted to try it out. So we both met, like again in the Bangalore office after I
Mm.
the Oregon person. I let him know how much I know of electromagnetics. He let me know, how much deep in waters he is. Then he explained what the work is. So the
Mm.
work was around like testing or validating the RF paths or the
Mm.
RF behavior, right?
Mm.
You would have spectrum analyzer, frequency generator, this and
Mm.
that. We had to program it remotely through, like, let's say there is like one Linux machine or Windows machine in this case, and all the devices are through Ethernet or USB connected to
Mhm.
this machine. We just had to write scripts to program them in a sequential manner so
Mhm.
that the Bluetooth RF was tested in a certain way,
Mm.
right? And in all of this mix, there was also thermal chamber. So a thermal chamber, the temperature of which can be remotely set, a frequency generator, spectrum analyzer, signal generator, so on and so forth. And that was fun. So
Mm.
I liked the idea that I would learn something new. What I did then was go back to Qualcomm, and then I told them that the sign on bonus is less. Right. So this was like, I knew that I had to dish this offer, I had to let
Right.
it go.
So you had
Uh,
already decided no matter
yeah,
what they
I
do,
had
you
decided.
are
Yes.
gonna stay with Intel
I was,
for and
yes.
jump to the RF.
Yes, and I had also decided that I will work on all the questions and the topics that were touched upon in that interview,
Hmm. Hmm.
make myself more capable over the years. And if RF did not fly, which it didn't, like I learned a lot
Hmm. Hmm.
in that 1.5 years, but the team wasn't going to continue, right?
Right.
So that way there was like a natural full stop
Hmm.
to
Hmm.
that effort. And that was also enough for
Hmm.
me to understand that maybe RF is not what I
Hmm.
want to do long term. It's too slow for my liking. It's, too nuanced. Like to become an expert in RF, you'll take like 20-30 years,
Hmm. Hmm.
in my opinion. Of course, there might be experts who have reached that point sooner. So I decided to work on myself. I got, enough points about what topics I should go in depth on. And I was in my head, I had already rejected the offer, except I wanted to play this game of how far can you push this?
Hmm.
How desperately do you want me? So I had a talk with the recruiter. I mentioned to her, hey, look, my friends tell me what, and this was like the bluff part. Those who are already at Qualcomm, that the sign-on bonus has to be like 5 to 6 lakhs. It's only 2 lakhs. You know, can you do something about this? And she was like, okay, let me talk to the hiring manager. So what happens is, if the HR, and for that position there's like certain budget allocated, if someone's overshooting that but you really really want that person, so the manager can use their discretion to kind of get that deal. So the manager then called me up, and he's like, hey, okay, how much are you seeking here? I was like, okay, it has to be like 5 to 6. Then he went in the direction of, okay, I can stretch until maybe three and a half. We really want you, you know come over.
Hmm.
And then I was like, okay, but does your team innovate? Do you file
Hmm.
IDFs, innovation, like the patents and all? Is that He's like, that is super encouraged. He listed out how many of his
Hmm.
engineers have like patents and all of that. And I was like, oh man,
No man.
like, that
What
was
I
else?
with the
can't
wrong.
use this point now.
Yeah. And he also ended up asking one other thing, is like, what is the buyout value?
Hmm.
Can you ask your manager if we can buy you out? Which is, if there
Hmm.
is any uh, you know any financial commitments, like I leave to before the notice period and so on and
Right.
so forth,
Mm.
then prorated basis I need to pay something back to the company. So they were like, we can accommodate that, we would
Hmm.
want you here faster. And that one line fed into, oh man, these guys have too much work, maybe too much grunt work, like the team
Hmm.
burning there, and he needs me like so desperately. And
Hmm.
that was again that final nail in the coffin in terms of deciding that I would love the innovativeness in the RF department than this. So yeah, I then said, okay, let me talk to my manager. I'll come back
Hmm.
to you. And then the recruiter called me back
Hmm.
like a day later, and then I let her know, hey, look, I have like we went back and forth. All said and done, I've decided that maybe this is not an offer for me right now. She was shocked.
Hmm.
Like nobody in their right mind would deny that offer,
Hmm.
just because the pay was too much, the team was
Right.
awesome, the engineers were awesome, they were filing patents and
Right.
whatnot. But then I let her go. She was like, maybe you're making a mistake in your career. And I was like, okay,
Hmm.
I've made enough of those already. So yeah, I let that offer go. They did not ban me,
Hmm.
because I did not commit. You know, I was not that stupid this time. So
Hmm.
they let me go, and she did ask me that if there are my peers or friend circle who would be interested in the position, that they would
Yeah.
be interested in interviewing them. So yeah, that happened. Qualcomm offer, I did not take it. I continued at Intel for another year and a half. I worked on the RF team, and then
Few
Nvidia
more
happened, and
entries.
Qualcomm happened,
Hmm.
and Google happened.
Google.
I think that story may be for another day because
Yes,
yeah,
it's this one's too long already. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
perfect.
Okay.
Okay, so
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Piyush. I mean, as
yeah,
always, it's so nice to have a chat with you. And plus, I think personally for me, and I hope for everyone who is watching it, it's always, I can always derive some actionables out of your story. Like, okay, this is how
yes,
I should, implement. This is how I should present myself, all of that stuff.
Yeah.
So I hope people who are watching were also able to derive some learnings, and yeah, hope it helps, just like it
Right.
helped Piyush.
And what I want to do is invite over our viewers to kind of, maybe write down about their own, stories and what worked for them in the comment section.
Yeah.
And also, if you'd want to like help other engineers, we do have a Discord server. Join that in,
Yes.
chat
Yes.
about your experience there, help other engineers out.
Hmm.
And if you need help, come over and ask us there,
Yeah.
and we'll be happy to have a chat.
Yeah. We have like
Yeah.
separate channels for career
Yeah,
discussions.
And I think to add to that, if you want to share your experience, you are
that's
welcome
welcome too.
on our
Yes.
channel.
Yes. We can have another podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Folks invited. Yeah.
Let's
Let's do
make it
that.
like a fun thing to talk about our screw ups, what did worked, what didn't
Hmm.
work,
Right.
what went like really down south.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes. Not. Why not?
cool.
And yeah, you will find all the links in the description if you want to join Discord, WhatsApp. Awesome.
Okay. Bye.
Okay, we
Perfect.
will see you folks in the next one. Bye
Yeah,
bye.
until
Bye.
then, goodbye.